You look like someone who should be standing in front of my bench, not walking free in my hallway. The words hang in the air of the Forsyth County Courthouse, second floor, 9:47 on a Tuesday morning. A black man in an Oxford shirt and khakis stands motionless while a judge in flowing black robes circles him like a predator examining wounded prey. 26 years on the bench. 26 years of unchallenged authority. And in approximately 4 hours, that authority will collapse, because the man Judge Harland Crestwood just threatened is the lead prosecutor assigned by the state attorney general to investigate judicial corruption in this very courthouse. But Crestwood doesn't know that yet. Nobody does. The fluorescent lights hum overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a door closes. The judge's shoes, Italian leather, polished to a mirror shine, click against the marble floor as he completes his circuit. "Brock," Crestwood doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. "Hold this man. I want to check something." The court security officer steps forward immediately. Brock Sutterly, 45 years old, former corrections officer at Forsyth County Detention, 220 pounds of muscle trained to restrain and control. His hand lands on the black man's shoulder, not gentle, not violent, just possession. "Sir, you're coming with me." The man doesn't resist, doesn't flinch, just speaks in a voice so calm it borders on unnerving. "On what legal basis?" Sutterly's grip tightens. "On the basis that Judge Crestwood said so. That's all the basis I need." If you want to see what happens when a judge picks the wrong target, hit that subscribe button and stay until the end, because this story is about to flip completely. 4 hours earlier. The alarm is set for 6 a.m. Tobias Ashford's eyes open at 5:47, 13 minutes before the tone. Same as yesterday. Same as the day before that. His body has learned rhythms that civilian life never quite erased. Patterns drilled in during years he doesn't talk about, skills he pretends not to have. The apartment is small. 1 bedroom in the Old Salem district of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Rent paid 3 months in advance. Cash, no questions asked. The kind of place a man chooses when he wants to disappear into ordinary. He rises without rushing. Shower, 4 minutes. Shave, 2. The face in the mirror is 39 years old, unremarkable by design. No beard to remember, no scars to identify. Just another black man in America, navigating spaces that weren't built for him. The clothes he selects are deliberate. Oxford shirt, light blue, professional but not formal. Khaki pants. Clean, pressed, forgettable. Brown leather shoes, worn enough to suggest regular use, not new enough to suggest wealth. No watch, no ring, no tie. Today is personal business. A property deed for his parents' land in Clemens. Simple errand. In and out. Nothing that requires the weight of his actual title. The briefcase sits on the kitchen table. Inside, the original deed transfer documents. A notarized copy. The fee receipt from March 12th. Confirmation code CRF 2019-04471. Each document in its own clear plastic sleeve, arranged in the order they'll be needed. This is how Tobias Ashford organizes his life. Systematic. Documented. Every piece of paper accounted for, every interaction anticipated. Habits formed in places where missed details meant lives lost. He doesn't think about those places anymore, or tries not to. The bus arrives at 7:23, Route 34, through downtown toward the government district. Tobias takes the rear seat, back to the wall, clear sight lines to both exits. Another habit he can't shake. The bus fills gradually. Office workers, students, a young mother with a stroller, an elderly man with a newspaper. At the Main Street stop, a woman boards. Mid-50s, white, dressed in the particular style of suburban professionals. Lululemon jacket, expensive sneakers, reusable coffee cup with a motivational slogan. She scans the available seats. Her eyes pass over the empty spot next to Tobias, linger for half a second, then move on. She chooses to stand. Tobias watches this happen without reaction. He's watched it happen 1,000 times. The small calculations people make, the invisible arithmetic of who belongs where and next to whom. He used to feel something about it, anger, maybe, or exhaustion. Now he just files it away. Data point. Pattern recognition. The courthouse appears through the window. Forsyth County Courthouse, a limestone edifice built in 1926, all columns and carved Latin phrases about justice and equality. Words chiseled by men who owned other men. Tobias appreciates the irony. He exits at the government center stop, walks the 3 blocks to the main entrance. The morning is crisp. March in North Carolina. Cold enough for a jacket, warm enough to skip it. He chose to skip it. Fewer layers to search. The security line moves slowly. Metal detectors, bag checks, the particular theater of courthouse safety. When Tobias reaches the front, the officer at the scanner, a heavy-set man with a nameplate reading D. Whitmore, looks at him longer than he looked at the 3 people before. Open the bag. Not a question. Not please, just command. Tobias opens the briefcase. Whitmore's fingers move through the contents with unnecessary thoroughness. He examines each plastic sleeve, holds the fee receipt up to the light as if checking for counterfeits, flips through the deed documents like a man searching for contraband. What's your business here? The woman in front of Tobias, white, mid-40s, carrying a purse the size of a small child, had not been asked this question. Neither had the man before her. Records Department, 2nd floor, picking up a property deed. Whitmore's eyes narrow slightly. Records Department, 2nd floor, straight ahead, don't wander. He hands back the briefcase without further comment. Tobias accepts it, walks through the metal detector, and doesn't look back. The elevator is out of service. A handwritten sign taped to the doors. Maintenance. Use stairs. Tobias climbs to the 2nd floor, follows signs to the records department, and enters a waiting room that smells of old paper and industrial cleaner. The ticket dispenser hums. He pulls number 47. The digital display reads, now serving 31. 16 people ahead of him. He finds a seat, opens his briefcase, and begins reviewing his documents for the 3rd time. Confirmation code CRF 2019-04471. Fee paid March 12th. Property address 4417 Clemens Road. His parents' names on the original deed, his own on the transfer request. Everything in order. Everything documented. Across the waiting room, a door opens. A woman emerges. Late 50s, silver hair pulled back in a precise bun, navy suit that costs more than most people's monthly rent. Her nameplate catches the light. Gwendolyn Rayburn, court administrator. She surveys the waiting room with the particular expression of someone cataloging livestock. Her gaze moves across the seated figures, pausing, assessing, moving on, until it reaches Tobias. It stops. She studies him for 3 full seconds, then turns to the clerk at the service window and speaks in a voice pitched low but not low enough. Check if that one's in the right department. Doesn't look like our usual clientele. The clerk glances at Tobias, then back at Rayburn, and nods. Tobias hears every word. He doesn't react. The wait stretches, 45 minutes, an hour. The digital display crawls forward with geological slowness. 32, 33, 34. At number 41, a man in an expensive suit approaches the window beside the one Tobias is watching. He doesn't take a ticket, doesn't wait, just walks directly to the counter and raps his knuckles on the wood. Archer, Morrison file. I'm in Judge Patterson's court in 20 minutes. The clerk behind the glass, an older man with silver hair and gold-framed glasses, nameplate reading A. Holstead, barely looks up from his computer. 1 moment, Paxton. 90 seconds later, a file folder slides through the window slot. Thanks, Archer. Drinks Friday? You're buying. The man in the suit, Paxton Merriweather, according to the North Carolina Bar Association pin on his lapel, takes his file and walks away without glancing at the 16 people still waiting. Number 47 finally appears on the display. Tobias approaches the window. The clerk, Archer Holstead, is typing something, eyes fixed on his screen. Number? 47. I'm here to collect a property deed. File number 2019 PR 04471. Holstead's fingers pause on the keyboard. He looks up, and his expression shifts. Something tightening around the eyes, a slight pull at the corners of his mouth. Recognition of a type, if not a person. Spell that. Tobias spells the file number. Holstead types with exaggerated slowness, each keystroke deliberate. Not finding it. The confirmation code is CRF 2019-04471, paid March 12th of this year. I have the receipt. Tobias slides the plastic sleeve through the window slot. Holstead glances at it without touching. System says no file matches that code. The receipt has the official county seal. The payment was processed. The file exists. Sir. Holstead's voice carries the particular condescension of bureaucrats who've learned to weaponize procedure. I can only tell you what the system shows, and the system shows nothing. Can you search by property address? 441 Clemens Road, Forsyth County. That's not standard procedure. What about by name? Ashford. The original deed holders were Raymond and Dorothy Ashford. I'd need a supervisor's authorization for a manual search, and my supervisor is in a meeting. Tobias feels the familiar tightness in his jaw, the tension of knowing exactly what's happening and being unable to prove it, the quiet violence of systems designed to exhaust. When will your supervisor be available? Hard to say. Holstead shrugs with theatrical helplessness. Could be an hour, could be all day. You're welcome to wait. A voice from behind. Archer, I need the Thompson bankruptcy filings. Judge Crawford's chambers, urgent. Another attorney, another direct approach to the window, another file produced in under 2 minutes. Tobias watches this happen. I've been waiting over an hour, he says when Holstead returns his attention to the screen. The attorneys don't seem to wait at all. Attorneys have court deadlines. You're just... Holstead waves a hand vaguely. Personal business. Personal business that I've paid county fees for. Fees that entitle me to the same service. Holstead's eyes flick upward. Something harder in them now. Sir, I've told you. The file doesn't exist in our system. If you have a complaint about county services, there's a form you can fill out. Otherwise, I have other customers to serve. Behind Tobias, number 48 is called. He doesn't move. I have a receipt that proves the file exists. I have a confirmation code issued by this office. The only thing I don't have is the service I already paid for. And I've explained. You've explained nothing. You've told me the system shows nothing, but you won't perform a manual search. You've served 3 attorneys with no file numbers, no confirmation codes, and no waiting, but you can't locate a file I have physical documentation for. Holstead's face goes still. I think you should lower your voice, sir. My voice is perfectly level. And I think you should step back from the window before I have to call security. Jamie. The button is under the counter. Holstead presses it without breaking eye contact with Tobias. 90 seconds later, Brock Sutterly appears. He's bigger in person than the waiting room made him seem. Shoulders like bridge supports. Hands that could crush a skull. The kind of man correctional facilities love. Big enough to intimidate, trained enough to hurt without leaving marks. What's the problem, Archer? This gentleman is refusing to accept that his file doesn't exist, getting aggressive. Sutterly's attention shifts to Tobias. The assessment is quick, professional, and utterly dismissive. Sir, come with me. I haven't done anything wrong. You're causing a disturbance in a county facility. Come with me, or I'll escort you out in cuffs. Tobias stands motionless. The waiting room has gone quiet. 16 pairs of eyes watching what happens next. I'm a citizen attempting to access public records I've paid for. That's not a disturbance. That's a constitutional right. Sutterly takes a step closer. close enough that Tobias can smell his aftershave, something cheap, applied too heavily. I don't know what college taught you those fancy words, but this is my courthouse, and in my courthouse, when I say move, you move. His hand reaches for Tobias's arm. Tobias doesn't pull away, doesn't resist, but his voice, when he speaks, carries an edge that wasn't there before. You're about to put hands on me without probable cause, without reasonable suspicion, and without any lawful basis. I want that noted for the record. Sutterly laughs. Noted for the record. That's cute. His grip closes around Tobias's bicep. Hard. Harder than necessary. The kind of grip designed to hurt without bruising, to establish dominance through controlled pain. Walk. Oh. The security office is a windowless room on the first floor. Gray walls, metal desk, 2 plastic chairs. The kind of space designed to make people feel small. Sutterly deposits Tobias in one of the chairs with more force than necessary. The impact jars his spine. Stay. Like commanding a dog. The door closes. Tobias is alone. He takes stock of the room. No cameras visible, though that doesn't mean they're not there. One door, currently locked from the outside. The desk is bolted to the floor. The chairs are not. From his breast pocket, he withdraws a small notebook and pen, items that weren't confiscated because he's not under arrest. He begins to write. 9:47 a.m. Detained by Court Security Officer Sutterly, per his statement, causing a disturbance. No specific conduct cited. No formal charges stated. 9:48 a.m. Transported to Security Office, first floor. Physical handling excessive. Grip on left bicep designed to cause pain. Request for legal basis ignored. The door opens. Sutterly returns with a second officer, younger, female, nameplate reading K. Dawes. Name: Tobias Ashford. Address: 4112 South Main Street, Apartment 3B. What's your business at the courthouse? I've already explained this. Property deed, records department, file number. I'm asking you again. Sutterly's tone has shifted, harder now. The voice of a man who's done this many times, who knows exactly how to escalate without technically crossing lines. Property deed. My parents' land in Clemens. I have all the documentation. Your parents own land in Clemens. The skepticism is audible. What kind of land? 12 acres, agricultural zoning. They've owned it since 1987. Sutterly glances at Dawes. Something passes between them, a silent communication Tobias can't decipher. We're going to run your information. Sit tight. They leave. The door locks behind them. Tobias continues writing. 9:52 a.m. Asked for name, address, purpose. Provided all 3. No explanation given for detention. No phone call offered. No rights read. 9:53 a.m. Officers departed. Door locked. Duration of detention, currently 6 minutes. The minutes stretch. 10. 15. 20. At 9 minutes past 10, the door opens again. Sutterly enters first. Behind him, Gwendolyn Rayburn, the court administrator who'd questioned whether Tobias belonged in the waiting room. Behind her, a third figure, male, late 60s, white hair swept back from a high forehead, black robes flowing like a medieval king's cape. Tobias recognizes him from the portraits lining the courthouse halls. Judge Harland Crestwood, 26 years on the Forsyth County bench, longest-serving judge in the district, a man whose word in this building is law. This is him? Crestwood addresses Sutterly without looking at Tobias. The one causing problems in records? Yes, Your Honor. Refused to accept that his file didn't exist. Got aggressive with Holstead. I didn't. Be quiet. Crestwood's voice isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It carries the particular authority of men who have never been contradicted in rooms they control. He turns to face Tobias for the first time, studies him the way a collector might study a specimen, with clinical detachment and a hint of distaste. Stand up. Tobias stands. Crestwood circles, slowly, examining the Oxford shirt, the khaki pants, the worn leather shoes. You say you're here for a property deed. Yes. Yes, what? Yes, I'm here for a property deed. Crestwood's lips thin. In my courtroom, when you address me, you say, Your Honor, or Sir. Are we clear? Tobias meets his eyes. I'm not in your courtroom. The silence that follows is absolute. Rayburn's intake of breath is audible. Sutterly's hand moves toward his belt, not to his weapon, but to his cuffs. Instinct. Preparation. Crestwood's expression doesn't change. But something shifts behind his eyes. A door closing. A decision made. Brock, run this man's information. Full check. Wants and warrants, criminal history, everything. Already done, Your Honor. He's clean. No record, no warrants. Clean. Crestwood repeats the word like it tastes wrong. No record. None, sir. Then why is he in my courthouse causing problems? He claims his file doesn't exist in the system. Got argumentative when Holstead couldn't produce it. Argumentative. Crestwood turns back to Tobias. Did you raise your voice to a county employee? I stated facts about the discrepancy between my documentation and the system results. That's not what I asked. My voice remained at conversational level throughout. That's not what the witnesses say. Then the witnesses are mistaken. Crestwood takes a step closer. He's tall, 6'2", maybe 6'3", and he uses that height now, looming over Tobias with deliberate intimidation. I've been a judge in this county for 26 years. I know what troublemakers look like. I know what criminals look like. And you, he jabs a finger toward Tobias's chest, stopping just short of contact, look like someone who should be standing in front of my bench, not walking free in my hallway. Tobias doesn't step back. That statement suggests you're prejudging me based on appearance rather than conduct. That statement suggests I've seen your type before, and I know exactly what you are. And what type is that, Your Honor? The title is delivered with precision, not respectful, not mocking, just accurate. Crestwood's face darkens. Gwendolyn, has this man been processed? Rayburn shakes her head. Just brought in for questioning, Judge. No formal action yet. Then let's formalize it. Brock, hold him for further investigation. Tobias's jaw tightens. Investigation of what? I've committed no crime? Your own officer confirmed I have no record, no warrants. On what basis are you holding me? On the basis that I'm a judge of this court, and you've disrupted its operations. Asking for records I've paid for is not disruption. It is, if I say it is. Crestwood nods to Sutterly. Take him to holding. I want to look into this personally. The judge has just made the worst decision of his career. And if you want to see the moment he realizes exactly how badly he miscalculated, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. The holding area is in the basement. Not a cell exactly, more of a waiting room with a lock on the outside. The space is designed for defendants awaiting their court appearances, not for citizens detained without charges. Sutterly doesn't explain this distinction. He just opens the door, shoves Tobias through, and pulls it shut behind him. Stay put. Judge will decide what to do with you. The lock engages with a heavy click. Tobias surveys his new environment. Concrete block walls painted institutional beige, wooden bench bolted to the floor, no windows. One fluorescent fixture humming overhead, its light flickering in irregular intervals. The smell is familiar. Disinfectant over despair, the particular olfactory signature of spaces where people wait for systems to decide their fates. He sits on the bench, withdraws his notebook, continues documenting. 10:22 a.m. Placed in basement holding area per Judge Crestwood's verbal order. No charges stated. No booking process. No phone call offered. Door locked from outside. Legal analysis. Detention without probable cause or reasonable suspicion violates Fourth Amendment. County v. Riverside, 1991. Established 48-hour limit even with probable cause. Current detention has no legal basis whatsoever. He writes for several minutes. Times, names, quotes as close to verbatim as memory allows. The habit is automatic. Years of training that taught him documentation is protection. Paper trails are armor. At 10:45, the door opens. Not Sutterly this time. A woman in a brown uniform, mid-30s, with the particular wariness of someone who's been in the job long enough to be cautious. You need water? Bathroom? I need a phone call. She hesitates. You haven't been booked. Technically, you're not in custody. If I can't leave, I'm in custody. Georgia Code 42452 guarantees phone access within reasonable time of detention. The woman's eyebrows rise slightly. This is North Carolina. NC General Stat 215A511 provides similar protections, reasonable access to communication upon detention. She studies him for a long moment. Who are you? Someone who knows his rights. A pause. Then, quietly, I can't authorize a call without Sutterly's approval, but I can tell you, whatever you think is happening here, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Crestwood doesn't like being challenged. Noted. She closes the door. The lock clicks. Tobias adds to his notes. 10:47 a.m. Female officer, brown uniform, no visible nameplate, offered water, denied phone request, stated need for Sutterly approval. Suggested situation would get worse. Possible sympathetic witness. An hour passes. The fluorescent light flickers and steadies, flickers and steadies. A rhythm almost like breathing. Tobias tracks time by the intervals, counting seconds between fluctuations to anchor himself in the passage of minutes. He thinks about his parents' land, 12 acres in Clemens where his father grew tomatoes and his mother planted roses. The deed transfer is supposed to finalize the property's move into a family trust, protection against future uncertainty, legal armor against the kinds of predation that have stripped black families of generational wealth for centuries. He thinks about the irony of being detained while trying to claim that inheritance. He thinks about the 7 months of work that led him here. At 11:31, the door opens. Sutterly fills the frame. On your feet. Tobias stands. The judge wants to see you again. Has something changed? Yeah. Sutterly's smile is unpleasant. He did some checking, says he wants to ask you a few more questions. They walk through basement corridors, up a service stairwell, through hallways Tobias hasn't seen before. Different route than before, away from the public areas. The door they stop at is unmarked. Sutterly knocks twice. Come. Judge Crestwood's chambers. The room is exactly what wealth and power would design for themselves. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture, bookshelves lined with legal volumes that have never been opened. A massive desk positioned to ensure anyone seated across from it feels small. Crestwood sits behind that desk. Rayburn stands to his left. To his right, a man Tobias hasn't seen before, late 50s, silver buzz cut, the posture of military or law enforcement. Sit. Tobias sits. This is Deputy Chief Lester Hanway from the County Sheriff's Department. Crestwood gestures toward the silver-haired man. He's here as a courtesy, in case this conversation takes a certain direction. What direction would that be? The direction where you explain what you're really doing in my courthouse. Tobias keeps his face neutral. I've explained that. Property deed, records department, file number. Stop! Crestwood raises a hand. I've had my clerk check that file number 3 times now. It doesn't exist. Never existed. The confirmation code you claim to have, not in our system. I have the physical receipt, with the county seal. Receipts can be forged. The accusation hangs in the air. You're suggesting I forged a county document? I'm suggesting that a man with no verifiable business in this courthouse, carrying documentation that doesn't match our records, who becomes belligerent when questioned, raises certain red flags. I wasn't belligerent. I asked for service I'd paid for. Multiple witnesses describe you raising your voice, making demands, refusing to comply with staff instructions. Multiple witnesses are lying. Crestwood's expression hardens. Be very careful, Mr. Ashford. Calling county employees liars is not a strategy I'd recommend. Neither is detaining citizens without legal basis, but here we are. The silence that follows is charged. Hanway shifts his weight. Rayburn's eyes widen slightly. Sutterly, standing behind Tobias's chair, makes a sound that might be a laugh. Crestwood leans forward. I'm going to give you one chance. One. Tell me who you really are and what you're really doing here. And maybe, we can resolve this without permanent consequences. Tobias meets his gaze. I'm Tobias Ashford. I live at 412 South Main Street, apartment 3B. I came here to collect a property deed for my parents' land in Clemens. Everything I've told you is the truth. And the documentation that doesn't match our records? That's your record's problem, not mine. Crestwood's hand comes down on the desk with a sharp crack. I've been a judge in this county since before you were old enough to shave. I've seen every kind of grifter, con man, and criminal who's ever walked through those doors. And I am telling you, I know what you are, even if I can't prove it yet. He stands, walks around the desk, stops directly in front of Tobias's chair. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay in holding until I'm satisfied. Could be an hour, could be all day, could be tomorrow. And while you're sitting down there, thinking about your rights, my people are going to dig into everything about you. Where you went to school, where you work, who your friends are, every speeding ticket, every parking violation, every whisper of anything that might explain what you're really doing in my courthouse. He leans down until his face is inches from Tobias's. And if we find something, anything, you're going to wish you'd been more cooperative. Tobias doesn't blink. I understand you're making threats. I'm documenting them. Document all you want. See where it gets you. Crestwood straightens, nods to Sutterly. Take him back downstairs. And Brock? Yes, Judge? If he gives you any trouble, handle it. The return to holding is rougher than before. Sutterly's grip on Tobias's arm is deliberately painful, fingers digging into the same spot he grabbed before. When they reach the basement corridor, he shoves Tobias against the wall hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs. You think you're smart. Sutterly's face is close, his breath hot and sour. College boy with his fancy words and his documentation. But let me tell you something about how things work in the real world. He slams Tobias against the wall again. The back of his head connects with concrete. Stars explode across his vision. In the real world, Judge Crestwood has been in charge of this courthouse longer than you've been alive. In the real world, nobody questions what happens in these hallways. And in the real world, another slam, harder this time. People who cause problems for the judge tend to have problems of their own. Tobias's voice is steady despite the pain. I'm noting the assault. Time, 11:52 a.m. Officer Sutterly. 3 impacts against the concrete wall. Sutterly laughs. Note whatever you want. You think anyone's going to believe you? Black man with no business being here, already in trouble for causing a scene, suddenly claims the security officer roughed him up? He shakes his head. That's not how the math works. He drags Tobias the rest of the way to the holding room, opens the door, shoves him inside hard enough that Tobias stumbles, catches himself on the bench, sits down heavily. Stay. The door slams. The lock engages. Tobias raises a hand to the back of his head. His fingers come away clean. No blood. But there's a knot forming already. Concussion unlikely, but possible. He catalogs the symptoms. Slight dizziness, mild nausea, throbbing pain. He opens his notebook. 11:52 a.m. Physical assault by Officer Sutterly in basement corridor. 3 impacts against concrete wall, back of head struck. No visible bleeding. Symptoms: dizziness, nausea, localized pain. Witness: none. Physical evidence: developing contusion, posterior cranium. The words are clinical, detached. The handwriting is steady despite the pain. This is what training looks like. This is what survival looks like. The afternoon stretches like taffy. No food is offered, no water, no phone call, no update on what's happening or how long he'll be held. Just the flickering light, the humming fixture, and the endless gray walls. Tobias sleeps briefly, 15-minute intervals with his back against the wall, the technique of a man who learned to rest without relaxing. Each time he wakes, he checks the time by the position of the shadow under the door and adds another entry to his notebook. At 2:17, the door opens. The female officer from before, still no visible nameplate, enters with a paper bag and a bottle of water. Lunch. She sets the items on the bench. Inside the bag, a bologna sandwich on white bread, an apple with a deep bruise, a small packet of chips. I convince Sutterly that not feeding you could be a liability issue. Her voice is low. Eat fast. He'll be back soon. Tobias takes the water first. His throat is painfully dry. What's happening up there? Judge Crestwood's been in his chambers all day, making calls. Had his clerk digging through records for hours. She pauses. He's looking for something on you, really looking. He won't find anything. Maybe not, but that might make things worse, not better. When Crestwood can't prove he's right, he tends to get creative. Creative how? She glances at the door. Last year, there was a man who came in to contest a traffic ticket. White guy, but with an attitude. Challenged the judge's authority in open court. Nothing happened that day. But 3 weeks later, his business got hit with a surprise tax audit. Month after that, his liquor license came up for review. Violations they'd never enforced before suddenly mattered. Coincidence? That's what the official record says. She moves toward the door. I shouldn't be talking to you, but for what it's worth, I've seen what happens to people who cross Crestwood. Whatever you're hiding, whatever your real story is, you might want to consider whether this fight is worth winning. I'm not hiding anything. She looks at him for a long moment. Then I hope you've got powerful friends, because you're going to need them. The door closes. The lock clicks. Tobias eats the sandwich mechanically. The bread is stale. The bologna has an off smell. He eats it anyway. Fuel is fuel. The apple is too bruised to salvage. He sets it aside. He returns to his notebook. 2:23 p.m. Female officer provided meal. Indicated Crestwood is actively investigating my background. Referenced previous instance of judge's extrajudicial retaliation against citizen who challenged him in court. Pattern suggests systemic abuse of position rather than isolated incident. He underlines the last sentence twice. 4:47. The door opens with no warning. Sutterly enters, followed by a man Tobias doesn't recognize. Short, balding, carrying a leather bag that marks him as an attorney. Get up. You're coming with me. Tobias stands. The attorney hangs back, expression unreadable. Where? Judge's chambers. He's got some people who want to talk to you. The walk back upstairs follows yet another route, through maintenance corridors, past locked doors, away from any chance of witnesses. Sutterly's grip is firm but not painful. A message: behave, and this stays civilized. They emerge on the 3rd floor, a different part of the building than before. Carpeted hallways, framed photographs of past judges, the smell of furniture polish and old money. Crestwood's chambers look different now. The desk has been pushed back. A conference table occupies the center of the room. Seated around it, Judge Crestwood, Gwendolyn Rayburn, Deputy Chief Hanway, Archer Holstead, and a woman Tobias hasn't seen before, mid-50s, gray suit, the particular posture of someone who expects deference. Sit. Tobias takes the only empty chair, facing all of them. Crestwood shuffles papers in front of him. Mr. Ashford, we've spent the better part of this day trying to verify your story, and I have to tell you, nothing checks out. Everything I've told you is true. The file you claim to be retrieving doesn't exist in our system. We've checked 3 times. Then your system has an error. The address you provided, 412 South Main Street, apartment 3B, is registered to a T. Ashford, but there's no record of employment, no utility bills in your name, no credit cards, no car registration. It's like you materialized out of thin air. I pay cash for most things. That's not illegal. No, but it is suspicious. Crestwood leans forward. Here's what I think, Mr. Ashford. I think you're running some kind of scam. Maybe real estate fraud. You've got fake documents, you're trying to file a fraudulent deed, something like that. Maybe something else. But whatever it is, you picked the wrong courthouse. I'm not running a scam. I'm a citizen trying to access public services. Then explain why your file doesn't exist. I can't explain your system's failure. And explain why you have no digital footprint, no employment records, no financial trail. My privacy is not evidence of wrongdoing. The woman in the gray suit speaks for the first time. Mr. Ashford, I'm Patricia Lennox, County Legal Counsel. Judge Crestwood has asked me to be present as an advisor. She folds her hands on the table. You should understand that your continued detention is irregular. We don't normally hold people without charges for this length of time. Then release me. That's what we're trying to determine, whether release is appropriate given the uncertainty around your situation. There's no uncertainty. I came for a deed. Your clerk said it doesn't exist. That's a clerical error, not a crime. Lennox glances at Crestwood. Something passes between them. Mr. Ashford, let me be direct. If you were to agree to leave the courthouse and not return, to simply walk away from this entire matter, we could consider that acceptable resolution. Tobias is very still. You want me to abandon my parents' property deed. I want this situation resolved without further escalation. The situation you created by detaining me without cause. The situation created by your presence raising legitimate concerns about what? Tobias's voice doesn't rise, but it sharpens. About a black man in a courthouse? About a citizen asking questions? About documentation that challenges your system's infallibility? The room goes quiet. Crestwood's face reddens. Watch your tone. My tone is the least of your problems, Your Honor. That sounds like a threat. It's an observation. You've detained me for over 7 hours without charges. You've had me assaulted by your security officer. You've attempted to coerce me into abandoning a legitimate property claim. Every one of those actions is documentable. Every one of them has legal consequences. Sutterly steps forward. Judge, let me take him back downstairs. No. Crestwood raises a hand. I want to hear this. I want to hear exactly what Mr. Ashford thinks his legal options are. Tobias meets his eyes. Unlawful detention. Civil rights violation under 42 U.S.C., Sector 1983. Potentially criminal violation under 18 U.S.C., Yecker 242. Deprivation of rights under color of law. Battery by a law enforcement officer. False imprisonment. Conspiracy to intimidate a citizen seeking public services. He lets the statutes hang in the air. That's what I think my legal options are. Crestwood leans back in his chair. You certainly know a lot about federal civil rights law for a man with no job, no bank account, and no verifiable existence. Is knowing the law a crime now? Knowing the law like that usually means you've had reason to learn it. Usually means you've been on the wrong side of it before. Or it means I'm educated. Educated. Crestwood snorts. Where? Harvard? Yale? Should I believe you're some kind of lawyer yourself, Mr. Ashford? Tobias says nothing. Tobias. That's what I thought. Crestwood stands. Here's my ruling. Mr. Ashford will remain in custody until we complete our investigation. That investigation will determine whether he's committed fraud, whether he's engaged in criminal trespass, whether any charges are appropriate. Until then. The door opens. A young clerk, Not Holstead, someone new, barely out of college, sticks her head in. "Judge Crestwood? There are people here from Raleigh. They say it's urgent." Crestwood frowns. "From Raleigh? I didn't have any meetings scheduled." "They said they're from the Attorney General's office, sir. They asked to speak with you immediately." Something shifts in the room. Hanway straightens. Rayburn's hand moves to her throat. Lennox's pen stops moving. The Attorney General's office doesn't make unscheduled visits to county courthouses. Crestwood's frown deepens. "Send them in." The door opens wider. Two figures enter. The first is a woman, mid-50s, gray suit, silver earrings, the particular composure of someone who has spent decades navigating the highest levels of state government. The second is a younger man, early 30s, carrying a leather attaché case. The woman surveys the room. Her gaze moves across each face. Crestwood, Rayburn, Hanway, Holstead, Lennox, Sutterly. Then stops on Tobias. "Mr. Ashford." Her voice is calm, professional, and carries an undertone of something Tobias recognizes. Deference. "We received your signal." Crestwood's head swivels between the woman and Tobias. "You know this man?" The woman doesn't answer him. Her attention remains on Tobias. "Are you all right? We came as soon as we confirmed the location." Tobias inclines his head slightly. "I'm fine. A few irregularities with my detention, but nothing I couldn't document." "Document?" The woman's lips thin. "I'm sure you have." Crestwood stands. "What is going on here? Who are you?" The woman turns to face him. When she speaks, her voice carries the full weight of state authority. "Judge Crestwood, I'm Ramona Whitfield, Deputy Director of Investigations for the North Carolina Attorney General's Office." She pauses. "And the man you've been detaining without charges for the past 7 hours is Tobias Ashford, lead prosecutor of our Special Prosecutions Unit." The silence that follows is absolute. "Lead? Prosecutor?" Crestwood's voice has lost its commanding timbre. It sounds hollow now, uncertain. "That's correct." Ramona Whitfield reaches into her attaché case and withdraws a leather credential holder. "Mr. Ashford was appointed 9 months ago by Attorney General Morrison to lead investigations into systemic judicial misconduct across North Carolina's county court systems." She opens the credential holder and places it on the table where everyone can see. The gold seal of the North Carolina Attorney General. A photograph of Tobias Ashford. The words Special Prosecutions Unit, Lead Prosecutor. "Including," Whitfield continues, "this courthouse." The room has gone very still. Hanway is the first to move. He edges his chair backward, physical distance from a situation spiraling beyond his control. Rayburn's face has drained of color. Her hand, still at her throat, trembles visibly. Holstead hasn't moved at all. He's staring at the credential like it might transform into a snake. And Crestwood looks like a man watching his house burn. He swallows. "That's not possible. We ran his information. There was nothing." "Of course there was nothing." Whitfield's voice is cold. "Mr. Ashford's role requires operational security. His records are partitioned at the state level. You could have searched every database in North Carolina and found only what we wanted you to find: a citizen, an ordinary man, someone with nothing to hide. But he said he was here for a property deed. He is here for a property deed. His parents' land in Clemens. Entirely legitimate personal business." Whitfield's eyes narrow. "Which makes your treatment of him all the more concerning." She turns to Tobias. "Would you like to describe what happened today?" Tobias stands. The notebook that's been in his breast pocket all day appears in his hand. "At approximately 8:45 a.m., I entered the courthouse through the main security checkpoint. The officer on duty, badge name D, Whitmore, subjected me to enhanced screening not applied to other visitors in the queue." He flips a page. "At approximately 9:30, after over an hour waiting, I approached the records window. Clerk Archer Holstead informed me that my file, confirmation code CRF 2019-04471, did not exist in the system. When I presented my receipt with the county seal as verification, he refused to perform a manual search. Another page. At 9:47, Officer Sutterly detained me at Holstead's request. I was not informed of any charges. I was not read any rights. I was told I was being held because Judge Crestwood said so. Another page. At approximately 10:22, I was placed in a holding cell in the basement. Judge Crestwood came to observe me. He stated, quote, "You look like someone who should be standing in front of my bench, not walking free in my hallway." He ordered my continued detention until he was satisfied, without specifying any legal basis. Another page. At 11:52 a.m., Officer Sutterly assaulted me in the basement corridor. 3 impacts against the concrete wall, contusion developing at the posterior of my skull. He looks up from the notebook. At 4:47 p.m., I was brought here for this meeting, where county legal counsel offered to release me if I agreed to walk away from my legitimate property claim. He closes the notebook. 7 hours, 11 minutes of unlawful detention, 1 assault, 1 attempted coercion, all documented. The room is silent. Then Patricia Lennox speaks, her voice careful. "Mr. Ashford, surely you can understand. From our perspective, without knowing who you were, without knowing who I was, you detained a black citizen who asked questions you couldn't answer." Tobias's voice is level. "Without knowing who I was, you assumed I was a criminal because I looked like your conception of one. Without knowing who I was, you held me for 7 hours, assaulted me, and tried to bribe me into silence." He looks at Crestwood. "That's not about not knowing who I was. That's about who you thought I was, and what you think people like me deserve." Crestwood finds his voice. "This is entrapment. You came here pretending to be—" "I came here as a citizen. I presented legitimate documentation. I made no false statements. Every word I spoke was true." Tobias's eyes don't waver. "You're the one who decided I was lying. You're the one who decided I was dangerous. You made that decision the moment you saw my face." "That's not—" "Judge Crestwood." Whitfield's voice cuts through. "I strongly advise you to stop talking. Anything you say from this point forward will be part of the official record of this investigation." Investigation. The word lands like a bomb. Investigation? Crestwood's voice cracks. "What investigation?" Whitfield reaches into her attaché case again. This time she withdraws a document several pages thick. "This is a preservation order signed by Federal Judge Margaret Thornton of the Middle District of North Carolina. It went into effect at 6 a.m. this morning." She places it on the table. "Every email, every text message, every phone record, every document generated by this courthouse is now subject to federal preservation requirements. Deletion, modification, or destruction of any such materials will constitute a separate criminal offense." Rayburn makes a small sound. Her voice is barely audible. "There were some emails this morning that Whitfield's expression doesn't change. "I suggest you consult with counsel, Ms. Rayburn, immediately." The door opens. 2 more people enter, a man and a woman, both in dark suits, both with the unmistakable bearing of federal law enforcement. "Deputy Director Whitfield," the male agent speaks. "We've secured the server room per your instructions." "Good. Begin the imaging process. I want complete copies of all systems before anyone has a chance to remember what they might have deleted." The agents nod and withdraw. Crestwood's face has gone from pale to ashen. This is unprecedented. You can't just—" "I can." Whitfield's voice is ice. "Under NC General Stat 447A 377, complaints about judicial misconduct must be forwarded to the Judicial Standards Commission within 30 days. Over the past 7 months, this courthouse has received 47 such complaints. Do you know how many were forwarded?" She waits. 0. The number hangs in the air. We have emails we obtained through FOIA before you knew we were looking, that show a systematic pattern of burying complaints. Special files, they were called. A system designed to ensure that no matter how many citizens complained about their treatment, no matter how many patterns emerged, nothing would ever reach the commission. She looks at Holstead. You created that system, Mr. Holstead, you and Ms. Rayburn. Holstead's mouth opens, closes, opens again. I want a lawyer. That's your right. I was just following orders. She told me, Archer. Rayburn's voice is sharp. Stop. Talking. But it's too late. The crack has appeared. The avalanche is coming. Everything this judge thought he knew is about to be dismantled. But the real revelation, the evidence that will destroy careers and potentially send people to prison, is still coming. If you want to see justice served, stay with this story until the end. Check ye. Tobias remains standing as the room fractures around him. He's watched this happen before. The moment when institutional power realizes it's been exposed. The scramble for cover. The desperate calculations about who to blame, what to admit, how to minimize. It never changes. The details shift, but the pattern holds. Crestwood is still trying to assert control. I demand to know how long this investigation has been ongoing. I demand to know why I wasn't informed. You weren't informed because you were the subject. Whitfield's patience is clearly finite. Subjects don't get advance notice of their own investigations. I'm a sitting judge. I have rights. You have the right to counsel. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you exercise both. She turns to Hanway. Deputy Chief, your cooperation in today's events will be noted in our records. Whether that notation is favorable or unfavorable depends on what you do in the next few minutes. Hanway's throat bobs. Judge Crestwood asked me to be present. As a courtesy, I didn't authorize any of the detention or the assault on a state prosecutor. I didn't know about that. Then you should have no objection to providing a full statement. My colleague, she gestures to the young man with the attaché case, will take your preliminary account now, unless you'd prefer to wait for your attorney. Hanway looks around the room. At Crestwood, who has nothing to offer him. At Rayburn, who won't meet anyone's eyes. At Sutterly, who has gone very still. I'll give a statement. Wise choice. The young man from the AG's office leads Hanway toward the door. They pass Sutterly on the way out. Whitfield's attention turns to the security officer. Officer Sutterly, you're going to stay right where you are until investigators from the State Bureau of Investigation arrive. They'll want to discuss the assault allegations. Sutterly's jaw tightens. That's his word against mine. No witnesses. There might not be witnesses to the corridor assault, but there are security cameras in this building. There are body camera requirements for court security officers, and there are medical records Mr. Ashford will be obtaining within the hour that will document his injuries. She pauses. Additionally, everything that happened in this room, in Judge Crestwood's chambers, has been recorded. Sutterly's head snaps toward Crestwood. You said there were no recordings in here. You said, there weren't. Crestwood's voice is hollow. There never have been. Whitfield allows herself a thin smile. Mr. Ashford has been wearing a recording device since 8 a.m. this morning, standard protocol for special investigations. Everything said in this room, including your admission that Judge Crestwood assured you there would be no recordings, is now part of the evidentiary record. The color drains from Sutterly's face. Tobias reaches into his pocket and withdraws a small device, a digital recorder, barely larger than a thumb drive. The audio quality is quite good, he says mildly. I particularly liked the part where Judge Crestwood said I look like someone who should be standing in front of my bench. Clear admission of prejudicial treatment based on appearance. Crestwood's hands are shaking. You can't. That's entrapment. That's. That's evidence. Whitfield's voice is final. And it's admissible. She moves toward the door. Judge Crestwood, you will be hearing from the Judicial Standards Commission within 48 hours. I recommend you consult with counsel before that conversation. In the meantime, consider yourself under investigation for violations of 18 U.S.C. Sefer 242, deprivation of rights under color of law, as well as potential state charges under N.C. General Statute. Fodder 14-3 for abuse of public office. She pauses at the threshold. 26 years on the bench, and this is how it ends. All because you couldn't imagine that a black man in your courthouse might actually be someone who matters. The door closes behind her. The courthouse lobby is crowded when Tobias emerges. Word has spread somehow. The way word always spreads in institutional environments, and staff members have found reasons to be in common areas, watching, whispering, trying to understand what's happening. Tobias walks through them without stopping. The main doors open onto the courthouse steps. The afternoon sun is low, casting long shadows across the plaza. A normal Tuesday in Winston-Salem, except for the 3 unmarked vehicles now parked in the reserved spaces, their government plates catching the light. Whitfield is waiting by one of the vehicles. You should get that head injury examined. I've already called ahead to Wake Forest Baptist. They're expecting you under the discretionary protocols. Tobias nods. The property deed, my parents' land. We'll be waiting for you tomorrow morning. I've already confirmed with the backup record system. Your file was never deleted, just hidden. Holstead buried it manually in a subfolder that wasn't connected to the main search function. For what reason? We'll find out. But based on the pattern, I suspect it's connected to the other complaints his office has been burying. Someone with the last name Ashford filed a discrimination complaint against this courthouse 8 years ago. Your uncle, I believe? Tobias is very still. My uncle Marcus. He tried to get a hearing on a zoning dispute, was told the paperwork didn't exist, gave up after 3 months of being stonewalled. Then today wasn't random. They recognized your name. They knew they had something to hide. The implication settles over him. Not just casual racism, targeted obstruction, a system specifically designed to frustrate anyone connected to previous complaints. How deep does this go? Whitfield's expression is complicated. Deeper than we initially thought. The emails we've obtained reference something called the Forsyth Judicial Support Fund. It appears to be a mechanism for channeling money to judges who cooperate with certain interests. Real estate developers, local businesses, people with cases before the court. Corruption. Potentially. We're still building the picture. Today was supposed to be reconnaissance. You were going to document your experience, we were going to add it to the pattern analysis, and we'd proceed from there. Instead, Crestwood accelerated everything. Dramatically. His decision to detain you triggered emergency protocols. The preservation order was already prepared. We just didn't expect to need it this soon. She opens the car door. Get your injuries documented. Get some rest. Tomorrow, the real work begins. Tobias doesn't move. That young woman, the officer who brought me food, she tried to warn me. Said Crestwood has a history of retaliating against people who cross him. Whitfield nods. Deputy K. Dawes. We're aware of her. She's filed 2 internal complaints in the past 18 months, both about irregular detention practices. Both were buried. She's a potential witness. She's a potential whistleblower. If she's willing. Whitfield's tone shifts. That's a big if. Whistleblowers in county systems don't have an easy road. Even when the state backs them, local pressure can be intense. I'd like to talk to her, when the time is right. I'll make sure you have the opportunity. Tobias takes one more look at the courthouse. The columns, the Latin inscriptions, the carved promises of equal justice. My parents built their life in this county, paid their taxes, followed every rule, and the system they trusted was rigged against them the whole time. Yes. And against everyone who looked like them. Yes. He turns away from the building. Then let's make sure it stops. The medical examination takes 2 hours. The contusion on the back of his head is documented with photographs, measurements, and detailed notes. A CT scan confirms no serious injury, but the physician, a tired resident named Dr. Chen, notes the pattern of impact marks. These aren't consistent with a fall. The positioning, the angle, someone struck you against a hard surface. Deliberately. I'm aware. Do you want to file a report? I can call hospital security, have them contact. There's already an investigation in progress. State level. Dr. Chen's eyebrows rise. State level. For an assault? For a pattern of abuses that the assault was part of. I see. A pause. Well, whoever you're going after, make sure you nail them. I've worked in the ER here for 3 years. You're not the first person I've seen with injuries from that courthouse. Tobias files that information away for later. The discharge paperwork includes prescriptions for pain management and instructions to watch for signs of concussion. Tobias folds the papers into his pocket alongside his notebook. Outside, the evening has settled over Winston-Salem. The city lights are coming on, scattered constellations of commerce and home. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wails. An ambulance or a police car, impossible to tell from this distance. A car is waiting at the hospital's side entrance. Not Whitfield's vehicle, a different sedan, unmarked but obviously government. The driver is a woman Tobias recognizes from the AG's office, someone from the support staff whose name he's forgotten. Mr. Ashford, I'm to take you to your residence. Thank you. The ride to Old Salem is quiet. The driver doesn't attempt conversation, which Tobias appreciates. He watches the city slide past. The old neighborhoods, the new developments, the uneasy mixture of history and progress that characterizes southern cities, still reckoning with their pasts. His apartment is dark when he arrives. He'd left in the morning expecting to be gone for an hour, maybe 2. Now it's nearly 9 p.m., and the simple errand of collecting a property deed has become the opening salvo in a state-level investigation. He unlocks the door, steps inside, doesn't turn on the lights. In the darkness, with the city sounds muffled by walls and windows, he allows himself a moment to breathe. The notebook is still in his pocket. The medical records are in his other pocket. The digital recorder has been surrendered to the AG's evidence team. The case is building, documenting itself, becoming the machinery of accountability. And yet, he thinks about his uncle Marcus, 8 years ago, defeated by a system that wouldn't even acknowledge his existence. Giving up because the alternative, fighting forever against an enemy that could simply ignore you, was too exhausting to contemplate. He thinks about the woman on the bus, the one who chose to stand rather than sit next to him. He thinks about every small indignity, every casual dismissal, every time someone looked at his face and decided what he was before he spoke a word. 26 years, Crestwood had served on that bench. 26 years of decisions shaped by whatever toxic mixture of bias and contempt had produced today's treatment. How many defendants had stood before him? How many sentences had reflected not the crime but the skin color of the criminal? The statistical analysis in the AG's file had shown the disparity. 52% harsher sentences for black defendants in Crestwood's courtroom. Numbers don't lie, but numbers also don't feel. They don't know what it's like to stand in that basement holding room, to hear the lock click, to understand that your freedom exists at the pleasure of someone who has already decided you're worthless. Tobias turns on the lights. His apartment is exactly as he left it. The breakfast dishes in the sink, the briefcase on the table, half emptied now, its contents scattered across courthouse conference rooms and evidence logs. The bed unmade because he hadn't planned to be gone long. Tomorrow, he'll begin the formal process. Depositions, evidence review, the slow, grinding work of building a case that will survive every appeal, every procedural challenge, every attempt to dismiss. Tonight, he sits in his darkened living room and thinks about the weight of what's coming. Crestwood won't go quietly. His lawyer will fight every revelation, contest every piece of evidence, drag the process out for months or years. The courthouse staff will close ranks, suddenly unable to remember conversations, suddenly uncertain about timelines. The local political establishment will decide whether Crestwood is an embarrassment to be sacrificed or an institution to be protected. And through all of it, people will keep walking through those courthouse doors. Black defendants will keep standing before judges who've already decided they're guilty. Citizens will keep being told that their documents don't exist, that their complaints don't matter, that the system is working exactly as intended. The work is never done. But it has to be done anyway. Tobias opens his notebook to a fresh page and begins writing notes for tomorrow's briefing. The phone rings at 11:47 p.m. Tobias has been asleep for less than an hour, the exhaustion of the day finally overwhelming his training. He surfaces from unconsciousness with the particular alertness of someone who's spent years sleeping in dangerous places. The display shows a blocked number. He answers. Ashford. Silence on the line. Then a voice. Male. Digitally altered. Unrecognizable. You think today was a victory. It wasn't. Tobias sits up. Who is this? Someone who's been in that courthouse a lot longer than Harlan Crestwood. Someone who knows what you're really up against. If you have information relevant to the investigation, information. The distorted voice laughs. Information is the least of what I have. But here's some for free. The Forsyth Judicial Support Fund? That's the tip of the iceberg. The real money comes from somewhere else. And the people who control it don't appreciate investigators who think they can walk in and dismantle 20 years of careful work. Are you threatening me? I'm educating you. Crestwood is a foot soldier, a useful idiot who thought his position made him untouchable. You've removed him from the board. Congratulations. But the game continues. The line is silent for a moment. You have two choices, Mr. Ashford. Walk away now. Declare victory. Let Crestwood be the sacrificial lamb. Everyone's happy. Everyone moves on. Or keep digging. Keep following the money. Keep asking questions. And if I keep digging, then you'd better be sure your documentation is perfect. Because the people you're threatening have been getting away with this for a long time. They know how to make problems disappear. The line goes dead. Tobias stares at the phone in the darkness. Then he reaches for his notebook and begins writing. The morning after changes everything. Tobias wakes at 5:31, 16 minutes before his alarm, with the phone call still echoing in his mind. The distorted voice, the casual threat, the suggestion that Crestwood was merely a foot soldier in something much larger. He showers, dresses, makes coffee he doesn't drink. By 6:15, he's at the small desk in his apartment's corner, laptop open, notebook beside it, beginning the work that the anonymous caller seemed so desperate to discourage. The Forsyth Judicial Support Fund. The name appeared in 3 emails obtained through FOIA requests 6 months ago. At the time, it seemed like a standard charitable organization, the kind of fund that sponsors courthouse renovations, judicial conferences, award ceremonies. Nothing that warranted special attention. Now Tobias pulls those emails again, reads them with different eyes. Contribution received from FJSF, $15,000. Allocate per standard distribution. FJSF quarterly meeting moved to Thursday. All principals expected. FJSF. New contributor approved. Background check complete. Welcome packet sent. Standard language. Innocuous phrasing. The kind of administrative correspondence that would bore anyone not looking for patterns. But patterns exist. The $15,000 mentioned in the first email was received 3 days before Judge Crestwood ruled in favor of a development company seeking zoning variances. The company's principals had no obvious connection to the courthouse, until Tobias traces their corporate structure through 4 shell companies to a real estate trust managed by someone named Roland Vickers. Roland Vickers, who appears in the second email as one of the principals expected at the FJSF quarterly meeting. Roland Vickers, whose daughter married Deputy Chief Lester Hanway's son in 2019. The connections multiply the longer Tobias looks. At 7:45, his phone buzzes. Ramona Whitfield. My office. 9 a.m. We need to discuss last night. You know about the call? I know about several calls, Apparently, you're not the only one who received late-night contact from anonymous sources. The Attorney General's regional office occupies the 4th floor of a glass tower in downtown Raleigh. Security is visible but not oppressive. Badge readers at the elevators, cameras in the corridors, the quiet confidence of people who have the law on their side. Whitfield's office is corner-facing, with windows overlooking the city's growing skyline. She's already at her desk when Tobias arrives, flanked by 2 people he doesn't recognize. Close the door. He does. This is Special Agent Caroline Vance, FBI Charlotte Field Office, and this is Assistant U.S. Attorney Derek Okonkwo, Middle District of North Carolina. Federal involvement. Tobias had expected it eventually, but not this quickly. The call you received last night, Whitfield continues. Tell them exactly what was said. Tobias recounts the conversation, the distorted voice, the reference to the Forsyth Judicial Support Fund, the warning about 20 years of careful work, the threat implied in the phrase, "make problems disappear." Agent Vance takes notes without looking up. We received similar calls at 3 other offices last night, she says when he finishes. Different voices, same message, back off, accept the Crestwood sacrifice, stop digging. Which suggests coordination, Okonkwo adds. Someone with access to multiple secure phone systems, knowledge of the investigation's scope, and the resources to reach state and federal officials simultaneously. Not Crestwood, Tobias says. Definitely not Crestwood. He's been in custody since last night, voluntary surrender technically, but his lawyer made it clear he had no choice. He hasn't made any calls except to his attorney. Whitfield pulls up a document on her screen. The Forsyth Judicial Support Fund was incorporated in 2004, tax-exempt status under 501c3. Listed purpose: supporting judicial education and courthouse improvement in Forsyth County. Board of Directors includes 3 retired judges, 2 local attorneys, and a property developer named Roland Vickers. Whitfield's eyes narrow. You've been doing homework. Since 5 this morning, Vickers is connected to at least 4 cases where Crestwood ruled in favor of development interests despite opposing evidence. The pattern goes back 8 years. Agent Vance looks up from her notes. We've been building a case on Vickers for 18 months. Real estate fraud primarily, shell companies, inflated appraisals, loans that default conveniently after properties are flipped to related parties. But we couldn't connect him to the courthouse decisions. The relationship was too well hidden. Until now. Until now. The room is quiet for a moment. Here's the problem, Okonkwo says. We can prove Crestwood received benefits from the fund. We can prove the fund is connected to people who had cases before his court. But proving quid pro quo, proving that specific payments led to specific decisions, requires either documentary evidence of the agreement or testimony from someone inside the arrangement. Holstead, Tobias says. Maybe. He's cooperating, but his knowledge appears limited. He managed the complaint burial system, but the fund operated above his level. He heard references to it, saw payments processed, but wasn't privy to the actual decision-making. Rayburn? Lawyered up, not talking. Her attorney has already floated the possibility of cooperation in exchange for immunity, but she's holding out for better terms. And Crestwood himself? Whitfield shakes her head. His lawyer is running a misunderstanding defense, claims Crestwood's treatment of you was overzealous but not racially motivated, claims the fund contributions were legitimate charitable donations with no connection to case outcomes, claims the statistical disparity in sentencing reflects case-specific factors rather than bias. That's absurd. That's defense strategy. It doesn't have to be true, it just has to create doubt. The evidence is mounting, but the real masterminds are still in the shadows. If you want to see how deep this corruption goes, keep watching, because we're about to follow the money. The next 3 weeks are a blur of depositions, document reviews, and late-night strategy sessions. Tobias works 18-hour days, sleeping in the office more often than his apartment. The case file grows from 1 box to 7, then to a dedicated storage room, then to a digital archive that requires its own server allocation. The patterns become clearer the more they dig. The Forsyth Judicial Support Fund received contributions from 27 businesses over its 20-year existence. Of those 27, 23 had cases before judges who also received benefits from the fund. Of those 23 cases, 19 resulted in favorable outcomes for the contributing businesses. 90% success rate. In a system where the baseline favorable outcome rate is approximately 40%. The statistical improbability is overwhelming. But statistics alone don't convict anyone. They establish pattern. They suggest corruption. They don't prove individual guilt beyond reasonable doubt. What proves guilt is documentation. And documentation, finally, arrives. The call comes at 2:47 on a Thursday afternoon. Mr. Ashford, this is Agent Vance. We need you at the Charlotte field office immediately. We have a witness. Tobias is in Raleigh, 90 minutes away by car. Who? Someone who just walked in off the street with a box of documents and a story that connects everything. The FBI's Charlotte field office occupies a nondescript building in the city's financial district. The exterior gives nothing away, just another glass and steel tower among dozens. But inside, past the security checkpoints and the armored doors, the machinery of federal law enforcement hums with quiet intensity. Agent Vance meets Tobias in the lobby. Her name is Denise Calloway. She was Roland Vickers' personal assistant for 11 years, until last week. What happened last week? She found out he was planning to have her take the fall for the fund's irregularities. Accounting discrepancies, backdated documents, all of it was going to point to her. She decided to get ahead of it. They walk through corridors lined with closed doors. Somewhere behind those doors, evidence is being analyzed. Witnesses are being interviewed. Cases are being built. The ordinary work of extraordinary accountability. The interview room is standard government issue. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, a table with recording equipment. Denise Calloway sits on one side, her attorney beside her. She's mid-40s, professionally dressed, with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying secrets too long. Tobias sits across from her. Ms. Calloway, I'm Tobias Ashford, lead prosecutor for the Special Prosecutions Unit. I understand you have information about the Forsyth Judicial Support Fund. I have more than information. Her voice is steady but tired. I have everything. She gestures to a cardboard box on the table, the kind used for moving offices, filled with folders and flash drives and what appear to be printed emails. 11 years of records, contribution agreements, distribution schedules, meeting minutes, everything Roland kept in his private files, which he thought only he could access. Why did you take these? Because last Thursday, I overheard him on the phone. He was talking to someone, I don't know who, about containing the Crestwood situation. He said the fund's exposure was manageable as long as they could identify the leak and seal it. She takes a breath. Then he said, Calloway's been with me long enough. She knows where things are. If we need a sacrificial lamb, she's the obvious choice. Her attorney places a hand on her arm. Ms. Calloway has agreed to provide full cooperation in exchange for immunity from prosecution. She was not involved in the fund's corrupt activities. She processed paperwork and maintained files, but she was kept deliberately ignorant of the actual purpose of the payments. Agent Vance leans forward. What can you tell us about how the fund actually operated? Calloway opens the box, begins pulling out folders. Every year, Roland would identify businesses that had pending matters before the Forsyth County courts. Zoning appeals, contract disputes, regulatory challenges. He'd approach them through intermediaries, lawyers, consultants, mutual friends, and explain that a contribution to the fund would demonstrate community commitment and support judicial independence. A bribe, in other words. Never called that, never written down as that. But everyone understood. You contribute, your case gets attention. You don't contribute, your case gets lost. She pulls out a ledger. This is the distribution schedule. Every quarter, the fund's educational grants went to judges who had ruled favorably on contributor cases. The amounts varied, $5,000 here, $15,000 there, but the timing was consistent, always within 60 days of the favorable ruling. Tobias takes the ledger. The entries are meticulous: dates, amounts, recipients. A paper trail that any prosecutor would kill for. How many judges received these grants? 7 over 20 years. Crestwood was the most consistent. He received payments almost every quarter for the past 8 years. But there were others. She names them. Tobias recognizes several. Judges still serving. Judges who have ruled on hundreds of cases. Judges whose decisions have shaped the lives of thousands of people who never knew the system was rigged against them. And Roland Vickers orchestrated all of this? Roland was the visible face, but he wasn't the top. The room goes still. What do you mean? Calloway hesitates. Her attorney nods slightly. There were meetings, quarterly, at a conference room in the Forsyth Development Building. Roland called them board meetings, but only 3 people ever attended. Roland, someone he called the banker, and someone he called the principal. Did you ever see these people? Once. About 5 years ago, I brought coffee to the wrong room. She closes her eyes, remembering. The banker was a man, older, gray hair, expensive suit. I didn't recognize him. But the principal... She stops. The principal was a woman, tall, silver hair, navy suit. Tobias feels the floor shift beneath him. Would you recognize her if you saw her again? I've seen her on television, multiple times. Calloway opens her eyes. Her name is Patricia Lennox. She's the county legal counsel for Forsyth County. She was in the room when you were detained. The drive back to Raleigh takes 2 hours in evening traffic. Tobias uses the time to process what he's learned. Patricia Lennox, the county's chief legal officer, the person responsible for advising the courthouse on ethical matters, compliance requirements, legal liability, the person who had offered to let him walk away if he abandoned his property claim. She wasn't trying to protect Crestwood. She was trying to protect herself. His phone rings. Whitfield. I just got the summary from Agent Vance. Lennox is the principal? According to Calloway. That changes everything. Lennox has been the county's legal counsel for 14 years. She's overseen every compliance review, every ethics investigation, every internal audit. If she's been running the fund, then the entire oversight structure is compromised. More than compromised, designed to fail. She built the system that was supposed to catch corruption, then used it to facilitate corruption. Silence on the line. We need to move carefully, Whitfield finally says. Lennox has connections throughout state government. She's on first-name basis with half the legislators in Raleigh. If we move against her without airtight evidence, we have Calloway's testimony. We have the ledger. We have documentation of payments to judges, including Crestwood. We have evidence of Vickers' involvement. We have Calloway pointing at Lennox. But we don't have Lennox's fingerprints on anything directly. No signatures, no emails, nothing that proves she knew what the money was for. The principal designation is Calloway's word. A defense attorney will argue she misunderstood, misremembered, or is lying to reduce her own exposure. Tobias stares at the highway ahead. Then we need someone else. Someone who can testify to Lennox's direct involvement. Who? Vickers isn't talking. His lawyer has him locked down tight. Crestwood claims he never knew where the fund money came from. The other judges will all invoke the fifth the moment we approach them. What about the banker, the third person at those meetings? Unknown. Calloway never got a name, never saw him again after that one glimpse. Then we find him. The search for the banker takes 11 days. They work backward from the fund's financial records, tracing deposits and withdrawals through a maze of accounts that spans 4 states and 2 offshore jurisdictions. The money moves like water, flowing through channels designed to obscure its source and destination, but water leaves traces, and traces can be followed. On the 9th day, they find a wire transfer that doesn't match the pattern. A deposit of $450,000 from an account in Delaware made the same day as one of Callaway's documented board meetings. The account is held by a trust. The trust is managed by a law firm, and the law firm's client records are protected by attorney-client privilege. But the wire transfer itself required identification, and the identification provided was a driver's license belonging to Winston Hayes, former Chief Financial Officer of First Regional Bank of North Carolina. Winston Hayes, who retired in 2018 with a $4.2 million severance package. Winston Hayes, who served on the board of 3 charitable foundations, 2 of which donated to the Forsyth Judicial Support Fund. Winston Hayes, who is currently 73 years old and living in a gated community outside Charlotte. Shaka. The approach has to be careful. Hayes is elderly, wealthy, and connected. He has lawyers who could tie up subpoenas for years. He has friends who could apply political pressure. He has the resources to simply disappear if he senses danger. But he also has something that works in their favor: a grandson. Marcus Hayes, 26 years old, currently serving 3 years in federal prison for securities fraud, a sentence that many observers considered harsh for a first offense, especially given the relatively small amounts involved. A sentence handed down by a judge who, according to Callaway's ledger, had received $18,000 from the Forsyth Judicial Support Fund the previous quarter. Agent Vance makes the initial contact. Mr. Hayes, my name is Caroline Vance. I'm with the FBI. I'd like to talk to you about your grandson. Silence on the phone. What about my grandson? I believe his sentence may have been influenced by factors unrelated to his crime, factors that, if proven, could be grounds for appeal. A longer silence. I'm listening. Winston Hayes agrees to meet at a neutral location, a law firm in Durham, with his attorney present, with recording equipment visible and acknowledged. He's smaller than his driver's license photo suggested. Age has shrunk him. But his eyes are sharp, and his posture carries the particular rigidity of a man preparing to negotiate. Before we begin, his attorney says, I want to clarify that Mr. Hayes is here voluntarily. He has not been charged with any crime. He reserves the right to terminate this conversation at any time. Understood, Tobias says. Hayes leans forward. Tell me about my grandson. Tobias opens a folder. Marcus Hayes was convicted of securities fraud in 2022. The amount involved was approximately $180,000, significant, but on the lower end of federal fraud cases. Sentencing guidelines for first offenses in this range typically suggest 12 to 18 months. Your grandson received 36 months. I know what he received. The sentencing judge was Martin Caldwell. 3 months before your grandson's case, Judge Caldwell received an educational grant of $18,000 from the Forsyth Judicial Support Fund. Hayes's face doesn't change. I'm aware of the fund. Are you aware that the fund was being used to influence judicial decisions? I'm aware that contributions were solicited from businesses with pending cases. I assumed the connection was informal, relationship building, not bribery. And when your grandson received an unusually harsh sentence from a judge who had received fund money? Hayes is quiet for a long moment. I asked questions. I was told the sentence was within judicial discretion. I was told that any attempt to appeal on grounds of bias would damage my grandson's chances of early release. Who told you that? Patricia Lennox. The name hangs in the air. Ms. Lennox contacted you directly? She called me the day after sentencing, said she'd heard about my concerns, said she understood how painful it must be to see families suffer, said that the best thing I could do for Marcus was accept the outcome and focus on supporting him through his incarceration. And you believed her? Hayes's jaw tightens. I believed she was warning me that if I pushed back, things would get worse for Marcus, that the same system that could sentence him harshly could make his time inside difficult. So you stayed quiet. I stayed quiet for 3 years, watched my grandson rot in a cell for a crime that deserved probation at most. Told myself I was protecting him. His voice cracks slightly. But I wasn't protecting him. I was protecting them. Hayes agrees to testify. His attorney negotiates terms, limited immunity for any technical violations related to the fund, protection from civil liability, assurances that his cooperation will be noted in any future proceedings involving his grandson's case. In exchange, Hayes provides everything: the meetings with Lennox, the structure of the fund, the understanding, never written, never explicit, but universally understood, that contributions would be rewarded and non-contributors would face headwinds. She called it judicial efficiency, Hayes says during his formal deposition. Said the fund helped ensure that cases were resolved predictably, that businesses could plan, investors could have confidence, the county could grow. And in exchange? In exchange, contributors got outcomes. Zoning variances, favorable rulings, reduced sentences when their executives got in trouble. He pauses. Everyone got what they wanted, except the people on the other side of those cases. The defendants who got harsh sentences, the businesses that lost to connected competitors, the families whose property got condemned for development projects. Did Lennox ever acknowledge the ethical problems with this arrangement? Once. I asked her how she could justify it. The manipulation, the corruption, the destruction of people's lives. She said something I've never forgotten. What did she say? Justice is a market like any other. We're just making it efficient. The full scope of the conspiracy is finally clear, but bringing down a system this powerful won't be easy. Stay with this story to see whether justice prevails or the machine protects its own. The indictments take 4 months to prepare. Not because the evidence is weak, it's overwhelming, but because the scope is unprecedented. 7 judges, 16 business owners, 3 county officials, and at the center of it all, Patricia Lennox, who spent 14 years building a corruption machine so sophisticated that it operated in plain sight without anyone noticing. The announcement comes on a Thursday morning in June. Tobias stands beside Attorney General Morrison as she reads the charges to a room full of cameras. Today, the state of North Carolina, in coordination with the United States Attorney's Office and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, is announcing a 63-count indictment against 26 individuals for offenses including bribery, extortion, wire fraud, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to deprive citizens of honest services. The cameras flash. Reporters scribble notes. Outside on the courthouse steps, protesters have gathered, some demanding accountability, others defending the accused. The charges stem from a 20-year scheme to corrupt the judicial system of Forsyth County. Central to this scheme was an organization called the Forsyth Judicial Support Fund, which solicited contributions from businesses with pending legal matters and funneled those contributions to judges in exchange for favorable rulings. Morrison pauses. Among those indicted is Patricia Lennox, former county legal counsel, who we allege served as the principal architect and coordinator of this conspiracy. Ms. Lennox exploited her position as the county's chief ethics officer to shield the scheme from detection, while personally benefiting from its proceeds. More camera flashes. Also indicted is Judge Harlan Crestwood, who received approximately $340,000 in improper payments over 8 years, and whose sentencing patterns show a clear bias against defendants whose attorneys or families failed to contribute to the fund. Tobias watches the reporters' faces. Some show shock. Others show the grim satisfaction of suspicions confirmed. A few show skepticism. The instinct to doubt institutional accountability that experience has taught them is usually warranted. They're not wrong to be skeptical. Indictments are not convictions. Trials take years. Appeals take longer. And the defendants in this case have resources, connections, and every incentive to fight. But the process has begun. The preliminary hearings stretch through summer and into fall. Motions to dismiss, motions to suppress, motions to change venue, to sever defendants, to delay proceedings for health reasons, and scheduling conflicts, and the 100 other procedural maneuvers that defense attorneys deploy when the evidence is damning. Most of the motions fail. A few succeed. 2 of the business owners have their charges reduced. Insufficient evidence of direct knowledge, the court rules, though the circumstantial case remains strong. One of the judges dies of a heart attack in September, his case closed without resolution. But the core conspiracy, Lennox, Crestwood, Vickers, and 11 others, proceeds toward trial. The first defendant to break is Archer Holstead. He pleads guilty in October to 1 count of conspiracy and 1 count of making false statements. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he provides testimony against the others. Detailed, documented testimony about how the complaint burial system worked, who gave him orders, and what he understood about the fund's purpose. Ms. Rayburn told me that certain complaints needed to be handled differently, he says on the stand. She said they were from problem citizens, people who didn't understand how the system worked. My job was to make sure those complaints never reached anyone who might act on them. And you understood this was wrong? I understood I had a pension to protect. I understood that people who asked too many questions didn't last long in that courthouse. I understood that keeping my head down and doing what I was told was the only way to survive. He looks at Crestwood, seated at the defense table. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not the one who built the system. I just lived in it. Gwendolyn Rayburn flips in November. Her attorney negotiates a plea deal that spares her prison time in exchange for full cooperation. She provides testimony about Lennox's role, the instructions, the meetings, the careful construction of a system designed to look legitimate while serving corrupt purposes. Patricia was brilliant, Rayburn says. She understood that the best corruption doesn't hide. It wears a mask of respectability. It follows procedures. It generates paperwork. It looks so normal that no one thinks to question it. And the complaints that were buried? Were handled exactly according to the procedures Patricia designed. That was the genius of it. We weren't violating the rules. We were following rules that were written to produce the outcomes she wanted. Did you ever object? Rayburn is quiet for a long moment. Once, early on, a complaint came in from a family. Their father had been sentenced to 20 years for a non-violent drug offense. They had evidence of irregularities in the trial. I thought we should forward it. What happened? Patricia called me into her office, closed the door, said she appreciated my conscientiousness, but that I needed to understand something about how the world worked. What did she say? She said, "The system doesn't serve justice, Gwendolyn. It serves order. And order requires that some people win and some people lose. Our job is to make sure the right people win." Patricia Lennox's trial begins in January. The courtroom is packed. Reporters, observers, family members of defendants and victims, law students taking notes for papers they'll write about this case for decades. Lennox sits at the defense table with the calm of someone who has spent her entire career controlling rooms exactly like this one. Her attorney is Richard Pemberton, a former federal prosecutor known for his ability to find reasonable doubt in even the most damning evidence. Tobias leads the prosecution. His opening statement takes 2 hours. He walks the jury through the fund's creation, its operation, its beneficiaries. He presents the ledger, the emails, the wire transfers. He describes the statistical impossibilities, the 90% success rate, the sentencing disparities, the pattern of favorable rulings that tracked contribution schedules with mathematical precision. Then he tells them about the victims. Marcus Pendleton, sentenced to 8 years for a first offense misdemeanor because his public defender didn't know the system was rigged. The Rodriguez family, whose property was condemned for a development project after they refused to sell to a fund contributor. Darnell Washington, who spent 3 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit because the judge who sentenced him had received $12,000 the previous month. This case is not about paperwork, Tobias tells the jury. It's not about technical violations or procedural irregularities. It's about people, real people, whose lives were destroyed by a system that was supposed to protect them, but instead treated them as commodities to be traded. He points at Lennox. She built that system. She maintained it. She profited from it. And for 14 years, she used her position as the county's chief ethics officer to ensure that no one ever looked too closely at what she was doing. Pemberton's defense is predictable but effective. He argues that Lennox was a dedicated public servant who managed a legitimate charitable organization, that the fund's contributions were voluntary and its grants were standard professional development support, that the statistical patterns are coincidental, the testimony is tainted by plea deals and immunity agreements, and the prosecution has failed to prove that Lennox ever explicitly connected contributions to outcomes. "Where is the smoking gun?" he asks in his closing argument. "Where is the email that says, 'Pay us and you'll win'? Where is the recording of my client promising favorable treatment in exchange for money? It doesn't exist, because my client didn't do what she's accused of." The jury deliberates for 6 days. The verdict comes on a Wednesday afternoon. Tobias stands as the foreperson rises. On count 1, conspiracy to commit bribery, we find the defendant guilty. The word ripples through the courtroom. On count 2, honest services fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Lennox's face doesn't change. On count 3, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, we find the defendant guilty. 27 counts in total. Guilty on 23. Not guilty on 4. The counts where Pemberton had successfully argued that the evidence was circumstantial. 23 convictions. More than enough. The judge sets sentencing for March. The other trials proceed through spring. Crestwood is convicted in February. His defense, that he didn't know the fund payments were connected to his rulings, collapses under the weight of Holstead's testimony and the emails documenting his requests for consideration on pending cases. Vickers is convicted in April. His attorney attempts to portray him as a businessman who was manipulated by Lennox, but the jury doesn't buy it. 11 years of orchestrating contributions and coordinating with judges proves difficult to dismiss as naivete. Winston Hayes testifies at 3 trials. His grandson's sentence is vacated in May, after a review determines that the original judge had received fund payments within 60 days of the ruling. Marcus Pendleton's appeal is granted in June. His 8-year sentence is reduced to time served, 2 years and 4 months, and he walks out of Butner Federal Prison on a morning when the temperature is already climbing toward 90. Tobias is there to meet him. "Mr. Ashford?" Pendleton's voice is rough. Prison does that to voices. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank yourself. You were one of the first people to file a complaint about Crestwood. That complaint, the one Holstead buried, helped establish the pattern that brought down the whole system. They told me the complaint went nowhere, that nobody cared." "Somebody cared. It just took longer than it should have." Pendleton looks at the prison gates behind him, then at the road ahead. "What do I do now?" "Whatever you want. For the first time in a long time, the system isn't rigged against you." Sentencing happens throughout the summer. Patricia Lennox receives 18 years. The judge calls her crimes a profound betrayal of public trust, and notes that her position as ethics officer makes her conduct uniquely egregious. Harland Crestwood receives 12 years. At 70 years old, it's effectively a life sentence. He will die in prison, surrounded by the people he once sentenced there. Roland Vickers receives 14 years plus $3.2 million in restitution. His assets are frozen pending civil forfeiture proceedings. The other defendants receive sentences ranging from probation to 8 years, depending on their level of involvement and cooperation. Brock Sutterly, the security officer who assaulted Tobias, pleads guilty to misdemeanor assault and receives 6 months, served on weekends so he can keep his pension. Tobias objects to the deal, but the U.S. Attorney's Office determines that pursuing felony charges would complicate the broader prosecution. Some justice, not enough, but more than there was. The reforms begin in September. The North Carolina Judicial Standards Commission implements new oversight procedures, mandatory reporting, independent audits, whistleblower protections. The Forsyth County Courthouse gets a new administrator, a new chief judge, and a new legal counsel. 53 cases from Crestwood's docket are flagged for review. 41 result in sentence modifications, retrials, or outright dismissals. The county sets aside $12 million for settlements with wrongfully convicted defendants. The FBI's pattern or practice investigation expands to 3 other counties where similar schemes are suspected. 2 more indictments follow by year's end. On paper, the system is being reformed. In practice, Tobias knows better than to trust paper. 9 months after the first verdict. December, Winston-Salem. The weather has turned cold, and the trees along South Main Street are bare. Tobias returns to his apartment for the first time in weeks. He's been living in Raleigh, working on the follow-up cases, building the infrastructure that will prevent what happened in Forsyth from happening elsewhere. His mailbox is full, bills, mostly, plus the accumulated junk mail of a life conducted elsewhere. At the bottom of the stack, a plain white envelope, no return address, postmarked Winston-Salem. He opens it carefully. Inside, a single sheet of paper, laser printed. Mr. Ashford, you think you won. You didn't. Lennox was a manager, not a founder. Crestwood was a tool, not a mastermind. The fund was one branch, not the tree. Ask about the other counties. Ask about the retirement accounts. Ask where the money went after it left the fund. You've pruned. You haven't uprooted. A friend Tobias reads the letter twice. Then he picks up his phone. Ramona, we need to talk. Bucks. The case has been won, but the war isn't over. If you've made it this far, you know that real justice isn't about single victories. It's about systems. And the system that created Lennox and Crestwood and Vickers is still out there, still operating, still destroying lives. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see what happens next, because this story is far from finished. The investigation into the other branches begins in January. The anonymous letter was right. The Forsyth Judicial Support Fund was one node in a network that spans at least 6 counties in North Carolina alone. Similar funds exist in South Carolina, Georgia, and Virginia. The money flows through a web of shell companies, charitable trusts, and offshore accounts that would take years to fully untangle. But Tobias has learned something about patience. He has learned that justice is not a destination, but a direction. That every corrupt system, no matter how entrenched, has cracks that can be widened. That documentation is protection, persistence is power, and the people who build machines of oppression always, eventually, make mistakes. He has also learned something about cost. His parents' property deed, the errand that started everything, was finally processed 3 weeks after Crestwood's arrest. The land in Clemens is now secured in a family trust, protected against the predation that his uncle Marcus experienced 8 years ago. But his uncle didn't live to see it. Marcus Ashford died in October, 2 months after the indictments were announced. Heart attack. The doctors said it was unrelated to his years of fighting the system, but Tobias isn't sure anything is unrelated. The stress of being stonewalled, the exhaustion of being ignored, the particular damage that accumulates when you spend years knowing that something is wrong and being told that you're imagining it. His uncle was 71. He should have had another decade at least. Instead, he had just long enough to see the beginning of accountability, but not its completion. Tobias keeps his uncle's photograph on his desk, a reminder, a motivation, a face to look at when the work gets hard and the progress gets slow. Chucker. The final scene of this chapter, not the final chapter because there is no final chapter, just ongoing work, happens on a Tuesday evening in March. Tobias is in his Raleigh office reviewing documents from the South Carolina investigation when his phone rings. Unknown number. He answers anyway. Mr. Ashford, this is Patricia Lennox. He nearly drops the phone. You're calling from prison? I have phone privileges, limited, but sufficient. Her voice is different than he remembers. Smaller, somehow, stripped of the authority that once made it commanding. I want to talk to you. About what? About the letter you received. Tobias is very still. How do you know about that? Because I sent it. Silence. I sent it because you need to understand something, Lennox continues. I am not the enemy you think I am. I was a functionary, a middle manager. The people who built the system I administered are still out there, still operating, still protected by layers of insulation that you haven't begun to penetrate. You ran a corruption scheme for 14 years. I maintained a corruption scheme that existed before I arrived and will continue after I'm gone. Unless someone does what I couldn't do. What's that? Follow the money past the fund, past the county accounts, past the state borders. The network extends into banking, real estate, political fundraising. It touches judges in 12 states. It's been operating since the 1990s. Why are you telling me this? A pause. Because I have 18 years to contemplate what I built. Because my daughters won't speak to me. Because I realized, somewhere between the conviction and the sentencing, that I spent my career serving people who would sacrifice me without hesitation. Another pause. And because watching you dismantle what I built, it wasn't what I expected to feel. What did you feel? Relief. The line crackles. There's a safety deposit box in Charlotte. First Regional Bank, Box 447. The key is taped under the third drawer of my desk in the storage unit where they put my belongings. In the box, you'll find documentation of the network's structure, names, accounts, relationships. Everything I compiled over 14 years. Waiting for a moment, I never had the courage to use it. Why didn't you? Because I was afraid. Because I benefited. Because I told myself that managing the corruption was better than being destroyed by it. A bitter laugh. I told myself a lot of things. And now? Now I'm in prison. My fear is realized. The worst has happened. And I find that the worst is survivable. Different than I imagined. Not as bad as the waiting for it to happen. The line is quiet. Use what I've given you, Mr. Ashford. Or don't. But know that the fight you started isn't even half finished. And know that somewhere in this system, there are other people like me, people who know what's wrong, who have the evidence to prove it, who are waiting for someone to make it safe to speak. What made it safe for you? Watching you walk into that courthouse alone. Watching you document every violation. Watching you refuse to be destroyed even when the entire machinery of my system was arrayed against you. A pause. That's what courage looks like, Mr. Ashford. Not the absence of fear. Just the decision to move forward anyway. The line goes dead. Tobias stares at the phone. Then he reaches for his notebook and begins to write. The safety deposit box is real. So is its contents. 300 pages of documentation that maps a network Tobias barely imagined existed. Connections between county judicial systems in a dozen states. Shell companies that funnel money from corporate donors to political campaigns to judicial elections. A systematic corruption of the justice system so comprehensive that dismantling it will take decades. But decades are what Tobias has. He is 39 years old. If he lives as long as his uncle should have, he has 30 years or more to work on this. 30 years of documenting violations, 30 years of building cases, 30 years of chipping away at systems that have operated in darkness since before he was born. It will never be finished. He understands that now. The work is not about completion. It's about direction. It's about pushing, constantly, against forces that would rather remain unchallenged. It's about proving, over and over, that accountability is possible. Not guaranteed, not easy, but possible. On his desk, his uncle's photograph watches him work. Outside, the March wind is cold, but the days are getting longer. Spring is coming. Chug. 3 weeks later, a Tuesday morning. Tobias is preparing for a meeting with the South Carolina Attorney General when his assistant knocks on the door. Mr. Ashford, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent. Who is it? She says her name is Deputy K. Dawes, from the Forsyth County Courthouse. Tobias remembers. The female officer who brought him food in the holding cell, who warned him about Crestwood, who filed complaints that were buried. "Send her in." Dawes enters slowly. She's not in uniform, civilian clothes, a nervous energy that contrasts with the steady competence Tobias remembers. "Mr. Ashford, thank you for seeing me." "Deputy Dawes, please, sit." She sits. "I've been thinking about what happened, about the trial, about everything that came out." She takes a breath. "I was there for 6 years. I saw things, heard things, filed complaints that went nowhere, and I told myself that was just how it worked, that there was nothing one person could do. And now? Now I know there was something one person could do. You did it. I had help, a lot of help. You started alone. In that holding cell, with nobody but enemies around you, you started documenting, you started fighting." Her eyes are bright. That matters. "Why are you here, Deputy Dawes?" She reaches into her bag, pulls out a folder. "Because I have things too. Things I documented over 6 years. Things I kept because I was afraid to throw them away, but too scared to use. Incident reports that got changed after I filed them. Conversations I overheard. Patterns I noticed." She places the folder on his desk. "I want to help. I want to be part of making sure this doesn't happen again." Tobias looks at the folder, then at Dawes. "Being a witness in federal investigations isn't easy. You'll face pressure, possibly retaliation. Your career in law enforcement might be over." "My career in law enforcement was over the moment I decided I couldn't keep pretending. This is the first time in 6 years I've felt like I could actually do something with what I know." Tobias considers. Then he opens the folder. "Tell me everything." The story continues. Not in the way stories are supposed to end, with resolution, with closure, with the clear division between before and after. The real world doesn't work that way. Corruption is hydra-headed. Victory against one manifestation just reveals another behind it. But the story continues anyway. Dawes becomes a witness in 3 additional cases. Her testimony helps convict 2 more officials in Forsyth County and triggers an investigation into the county sheriff's department. The South Carolina investigation produces indictments in October, 8 defendants, including a sitting state senator. The documentation from Lennox's safety deposit box leads to federal probes in Georgia and Virginia, with more expected. And in Forsyth County, where it all started, things begin, slowly, imperfectly, to change. The new courthouse administrator implements civilian oversight boards. The new chief judge requires sentencing transparency reports. The new legal counsel establishes a complaint tracking system that actually forwards complaints to the appropriate authorities. Small changes, incremental progress, the kind of reform that doesn't make headlines but makes difference in the lives of people who encounter the system. In the holding cell where Tobias spent 7 hours, there's now a posted sign, "Your rights during detention." It lists phone call access, legal representation, time limits, and complaint procedures. A small thing. But someone walking into that cell now will know what Tobias had to figure out for himself. Epilogue. 1 year after the first indictment. Tobias stands in a cemetery in Clemens, North Carolina. The headstone is new, gray granite, simple lettering. Marcus Ashford, 1952 to 2024. Beloved brother, uncle, fighter. The land behind the cemetery, 12 acres of tobacco fields gone fallow, belongs to the family trust now. Protected, preserved, a legacy that almost wasn't. Tobias places a small stone on the headstone, an old tradition, a way of saying, "I was here. I remember." "We got them," he says quietly. "Most of them, and we're still getting the rest." The wind moves through the bare trees. It's not finished, probably never will be, but it's different now. The system knows someone's watching. The people who operate it know there are consequences. He pauses. "You deserve to see this. You deserve to know that the years you spent fighting weren't wasted. that your complaints, your persistence, your refusal to accept that this was just how things worked, it mattered. It helped build the case that brought them down. The stone sits on the headstone, gray against gray. I'm going to keep going, for as long as it takes, because that's what you would have done. Tobias stands there for a long time. Then he turns and walks back to his car. There's work to do. Cue the final image. The final, a courthouse. Not Forsyth County. Somewhere else, another state, another system, with another set of problems. A man walks through the metal detectors. Black, mid-40s, dressed in ordinary clothes. He carries a briefcase with documents arranged in clear plastic sleeves. The security officer looks at him. What's your business here? The man meets his eyes. I'm here to file a complaint. The officer nods. Complaints are second floor, room 204. Someone will help you there. The man walks toward the stairs. He doesn't know if the complaint will be heard, doesn't know if the system will respond, doesn't know if anything will change. But he knows something now that he didn't know before. He knows it's possible. And sometimes knowing is enough to start. The phone call comes at 3:17 in the morning. Tobias has learned to sleep with his phone on the nightstand, volume up, because the calls that matter always come at hours when decent people are unconscious. Whistleblowers work up their courage in the dark. Sources decide to talk when the weight of secrets becomes heavier than the fear of exposure. Justice, it turns out, keeps irregular hours. Ashford. Mr. Ashford, this is Marcus Pendleton. The name pulls Tobias fully awake. Pendleton, the young man who served 2 years for a misdemeanor, whose case was one of the first dominoes to fall. Marcus, it's 3 in the morning. I know, I'm sorry, but I didn't know who else to call. There's something in his voice. Not fear exactly. Something harder to name. What's wrong? I'm in Georgia, Savannah. I've been working with a legal aid organization down here, helping people navigate the system, using what happened to me to help others. I heard. Good work. Yeah, well. A pause. Tonight I was at a community meeting, Chatham County Courthouse, public forum about sentencing reform, and I saw something. What did you see? A man, older guy, gray hair, expensive suit. He was sitting in the back, not participating, just watching. And when the meeting ended, he walked out with 3 people, a judge, the county clerk, and someone I didn't recognize. That's not unusual. Officials attend public meetings. No, but here's the thing. I recognized him, the gray-haired man. I saw his picture in the discovery documents from Crestwood's trial. Tobias sits up. Which picture? The one labeled unidentified meeting participant. From that surveillance photo the FBI took outside the Forsyth Development Building in 2019. The photograph. Tobias remembers it. A grainy image of 3 men entering a private meeting. Roland Vickers, Harland Crestwood, and a third figure whose face was partially obscured. The FBI had never been able to identify him. You're sure it's the same man? Same build, same way of moving, same way of standing like he owns whatever room he's in. Pendleton's voice tightens. Mr. Ashford, I think the network you exposed in North Carolina is operating down here, and I think I just saw one of its leaders. The Savannah investigation begins quietly. Tobias doesn't have jurisdiction in Georgia, but he has contacts. Other prosecutors, federal agents, journalists who've covered judicial corruption in the Southeast. He makes calls, shares information, plants seeds that others will have to cultivate. 3 weeks later, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation opens a preliminary inquiry into the Chatham County court system. 2 months after that, a whistleblower emerges, a clerk who's been documenting irregularities for years, waiting for someone to make it safe to speak. The pattern is familiar. Contributions to civic improvement funds, favorable rulings for connected parties, complaints that disappear into administrative limbo. A system designed to look legitimate while serving corrupt interests. Different state, different names. same disease. Tobias provides consultation, shares documentation strategies, connects the Georgia team with witnesses from the North Carolina cases who can speak to how these networks operate. He can't lead the fight everywhere, but he can help others fight it. That's the lesson he's learned over 18 months. The work is too big for one person, too big for one office. The only way to win is to build capacity, train others, share knowledge, create a community of accountability that can operate in multiple jurisdictions simultaneously. The network he's fighting took decades to build. Dismantling it will take at least as long.
Chapter. In April, Patricia Lennox requests a meeting. She's been transferred to a federal facility in West Virginia, part of the shuffling that happens when high-profile inmates become targets for other prisoners. Her voice on the phone is thinner than Tobias remembers, stripped of the authority that once made it commanding. I have more information. Things I didn't include in the safety deposit box. Why not? Because I was still protecting people, still hoping that some relationships might survive what I'd done. A bitter laugh. Foolish. Nothing survives this kind of fall. What kind of information? Names. The real names behind the shell companies. The people who built the network before I ever joined it. Why tell me now? Silence on the line. Because my daughter visited last week. First time in 14 months. She brought my granddaughter. A child I've never held, never will hold outside of a prison visiting room. Her voice breaks slightly. I watched my granddaughter play with blocks on the floor of a federal penitentiary, and I realized that every day I protect the people who built this system is another day I'm choosing them over her, over any chance of being something other than a monster in my family's memory. The names? 3 men. Howard Castellan. He was a federal judge in the Fourth Circuit until he retired in 2015. Now he consults for judicial efficiency organizations across the Southeast. Vincent Traeger, hedge fund manager, specializes in distressed real estate, has connections to development projects in 6 states, and Randall Ashworth. The last name makes Tobias pause. Ashworth? Any relation to? No. Different family entirely. But he was the original architect. State legislator in North Carolina in the 1980s, then moved into lobbying, then disappeared into private consulting around 2000. He designed the template that every corrupt judicial fund in this network follows. Where is he now? That's the problem. Nobody knows. He went dark about 5 years ago, sold his properties, closed his accounts, vanished. But the system he built keeps running without him. A system doesn't run itself. No. Someone took over. Someone who learned from Ashworth, who has his documentation, who knows where all the bodies are buried. Who? Silence. I don't know. That's the truth. Ashworth kept that information compartmentalized, only he knew the full picture. Whoever inherited his role has maintained that secrecy. Then how do we find them? Follow the money far enough, and eventually you'll find someone making decisions. That's how these things work. The money has to flow somewhere. The orders have to come from someone. The hunt for Randall Ashworth consumes the summer. Tobias works with FBI analysts, forensic accountants, investigative journalists who specialize in finding people who don't want to be found. They trace Ashworth's movements backward, from his disappearance in 2019 through 2 decades of political influence and private consulting, all the way back to his early career as a young legislator with a talent for building coalitions. The picture that emerges is disturbing. Ashworth didn't just create a corruption network. He created an ideology, a philosophy of governance that treated the justice system as a market, judges as service providers, and legal outcomes as commodities to be bought and sold. Justice is inefficient, one of his early speeches reads. It's slow, unpredictable, and creates uncertainty that discourages investment. What businesses need, what communities need, is predictability. The ability to plan, to know before they commit resources what the outcome will be. The solution, in Ashworth's vision, was to create judicial coordination mechanisms, funds and foundations that would align judicial behavior with economic interests. Not bribery, in his framing. Efficiency optimization. A way to make the legal system serve the people who actually mattered. The people with money. The philosophy spread through conferences, consulting arrangements, discreet conversations at political fundraisers. By the time Ashworth disappeared, his template had been adopted in at least a dozen states, administered by local operators who may never have met the man himself. A franchise of corruption. And somewhere, someone is still running it. The breakthrough comes in September. A forensic accountant named Denise Okafor, one of the specialists Tobias brought onto the expanded investigation, finds a pattern in the shell company registrations. "Look at the registered agents," she says, spreading documents across the conference table. "Different names, different addresses, but the notarizations all have something in common." Tobias looks. They're all notarized by the same person. Exactly. A woman named Margaret Holt. She's a licensed notary in North Carolina, has been for 30 years. And in that time, she's notarized documents for 47 different companies connected to the judicial corruption network. She could be innocent. Notaries process whatever comes across their desk. Could be. But look at this. Okafor pulls out another document. Margaret Holt is also the registered agent for a company called Ashworth Legacy Holdings, incorporated in 2018, 1 year before Randall Ashworth disappeared. Ashworth Legacy Holdings. It owns no property, has no employees, generates no revenue. But every year, it receives a single wire transfer of exactly $1.2 million from an offshore account. And every year, it distributes that money to 17 different civic improvement funds across 7 states. She's the connection, the person who inherited Ashworth's role. Or she knows who did. Margaret Holt is 72 years old. She lives in a modest house outside Durham, drives a 12-year-old Honda, and volunteers at her church every Sunday. Nothing in her lifestyle suggests access to millions of dollars or involvement in multi-state corruption. But when FBI agents arrive to question her, she doesn't seem surprised. "I wondered when you'd come," she says, offering them coffee with the calm of someone who's been expecting this moment for a long time. "Randall said you would, eventually. Said the system he built was too big to stay hidden forever." "You know where Ashworth is?" "New. Past tense." She pours coffee with steady hands. "Randall died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. I was with him at the end." "Then who's been running the network?" "Running is a strong word. Maintaining, maybe. Keeping the machinery oiled." She sits across from the agents. "After Randall passed, there was a question of what to do. The network existed. The funds existed. The relationships existed. Someone had to keep things organized, or everything would fall apart. And that someone was you? I kept the books, processed the paperwork, made sure the money went where it was supposed to go." She shrugs. "I never made decisions about who to help or who to hurt. I just kept the system running." "You're confessing to federal crimes." "I'm 72 years old. I have stage 3 breast cancer. I'm not going to prison. I'm going to die, probably within the year." She sips her coffee. "What I can do is tell you everything, every name, every account, every connection, so that when I'm gone, the system goes with me." "Why?" For the first time, something flickers in her expression, something like pain. "Because my grandson is black. His father, my son, married a black woman, and they have a beautiful boy who's going to grow up in a world where the system I helped maintain will treat him as less than human." She sets down her coffee cup. "I spent 50 years telling myself it was just business, just efficiency, just the way the world worked. But then I watched my grandson play, and I thought about what would happen if he ever ended up in front of one of the judges we'd paid. I thought about the Marcus Pendletons out there, the young men destroyed by a system I helped build." Tears on her weathered cheeks. "I can't undo what I've done, but I can burn it down, all of it, every name, every connection, every dollar. I can give you the keys to the whole machine, and watch you tear it apart. The documents Margaret Holt provides fill 3 filing cabinets, names of judges in 14 states, shell company structures dating back to 1992, wire transfer records showing hundreds of millions of dollars flowing through the network over 3 decades, a complete map of the corruption infrastructure that Randall Ashworth built and others maintained. The indictments, when they come, will be the largest judicial corruption prosecution in American history. But that's months away. For now, there's only the work: reviewing documents, interviewing witnesses, building cases that will survive every appeal, every challenge, every attempt to dismiss. Tobias spends 18-hour days in the evidence room, reading through financial records that document the systematic destruction of equal justice. Every page represents lives ruined, families destroyed, communities hollowed out by a system that treated them as resources to be extracted rather than citizens to be served. Some nights, the weight of it is almost unbearable. Other nights, he looks at his uncle's photograph and keeps going. On a Tuesday in November, Tobias receives a letter. Not anonymous this time. The return address is a federal detention facility in West Virginia. Mr. Ashford, I heard about Margaret Holt, about the documents, about what's coming. You're going to destroy something that took decades to build, something that powerful people spent their lives creating and protecting. You're going to tear down a system that, whatever its flaws, provided order and predictability to a chaotic world. I should hate you for that. But I don't. I think, in some way I couldn't admit while I was free, I wanted someone to stop it, wanted someone to prove that the system I served wasn't inevitable, wasn't the only way. You did that. You proved it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. What I did doesn't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that watching you work, watching you refuse to give up, refuse to be intimidated, refuse to accept that corruption was just how things worked, changed something in me. You made me remember what I believed before I stopped believing in anything. I don't know if that matters. Probably it doesn't. But I wanted you to know. Patricia Lennox. Tobias reads the letter twice. Then he folds it carefully and places it in the drawer with his uncle's photograph. The Ashford family gathers at the land in Clemens. The 12 acres are dormant now. Winter has stripped the trees and browned the fields, but the farmhouse has been restored, and lights glow warm in every window. Tobias arrives late, after a day of depositions and document reviews. His mother meets him at the door with an embrace that lasts longer than usual. You work too hard. There's too much work to do. There's always too much work. That doesn't mean you have to do all of it. Inside, the house is full of family. Cousins he hasn't seen in years. Nieces and nephews who barely remember him. His father seated by the fire watching the chaos with the particular contentment of a man surrounded by his legacy. Tobias. His father's voice is weaker than it was a year ago, age catching up, but his eyes are sharp. Come sit. Tobias sits. Your uncle would be proud of you. I wish he could have seen it. He saw enough. He saw you start. His father's hand, weathered and strong despite the years, rests on Tobias's arm. That's what matters. Starting. Keeping going. Building something that continues after you're gone. The work isn't finished. Work like yours is never finished. That's not failure. That's just the nature of the fight. His father's eyes drift to the window, to the land beyond. Your grandfather bought this property in 1962. People told him a black man couldn't own land in Forsyth County, that the system wouldn't allow it, that he was foolish to try. But he tried anyway. He tried anyway, and here we are, 60 years later, still holding it, still passing it down, still proving that the people who said it couldn't be done were wrong. His father looks at him. That's what you're doing, Tobias. Not just winning cases, building proof, showing people that the system can be challenged, that corruption can be exposed, that justice, however imperfect, is possible. Sometimes it doesn't feel like enough. It's never enough, but it's something, and something is better than nothing. His father squeezes his arm. Now go eat. Your mother made sweet potato pie, and your cousins are going to finish it if you don't hurry. Later that night, after the family has scattered to various corners of the house for sleep, Tobias stands on the porch alone. The stars are bright over Clemens, the same stars his grandfather saw when he first walked this land, the same stars his uncle saw during all those years of fighting a system that refused to acknowledge his existence. The work continues. Tomorrow, there will be more documents to review, more witnesses to interview, more cases to build. The network Margaret Holt exposed will take years to fully dismantle, and even then, new networks will emerge. New corruption will take root. New fights will need to be fought. That's the nature of the work. But tonight, standing on land his family has held for 60 years, Tobias allows himself a moment of something like peace. The system said his grandfather couldn't own this land. He owned it anyway. The system said his uncle's complaints didn't matter. They helped bring down a 20-year conspiracy. The system said a black man in a courthouse was automatically suspicious. That black man turned out to be the prosecutor who would expose the system's rot. The work is never finished, but the work is possible, and sometimes that's enough. The investigation continues. The trials will take years. The appeals will take longer. Some of the guilty will escape through procedural technicalities or plea deals or simple death before justice catches up with them. But the exposure has happened. The documentation exists. The proof is in the public record, indelible, undeniable. And somewhere in America tonight, another person is documenting. Another witness is gathering courage. Another prosecutor is building a case that will take years to complete but will eventually, inevitably, bear fruit. The network Randall Ashworth built believed that corruption was efficient, that justice was a market, that the right amount of money could buy any outcome. They were wrong. Justice isn't efficient. It's slow, frustrating, imperfect. It requires patience, persistence, documentation. It requires people willing to work 18-hour days for years at a time, knowing that the work will never truly be finished. But it's real, and it's coming.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.